All right, so we are moving to part 4 of human growth and development. We're going to start with Jane Lovinger. She's a stage theorist. She focused on ego development via 7 stages and 2 transitions. Her the highest level of her stages was being integrated, and that's Jane Lovinger, stage theorist. 7 stages and 2 transitions, highest being integrated. So we have desensitization, refers to behavior therapy techniques that help to ameliorate or improve anxiety reactions. Under desensitization, you have covert desensitization is the psychological process which cannot be directly observed. And then you have vivo desensitization, means the client is exposed to an actual situation which might prove frightful or difficult. So covert, think hidden, like covert mission, hidden or secretive. Um, so that'll be more so in the mind or versus vivo or in vivo, which is in real life outside of the mind. We have Eleanor Gibson. She researched the matter of depth perception in children, utilizing what she calls a visual cliff. A visual cliff is a device which utilizes a glass sheet which stimulates or simulates a drop off. By the 6th month of life, most infants will not attempt to cross the drop off, thus indicating that depth perception in humans is inherent, i.e., inborn or innate. By 8 months of age, the child begins to show stranger anxiety, meaning that he or she can discriminate a familiar person from an unknown person. We have empiricism. Empiricism is theories theorists who believe that development merely consists of quantitative changes. Scientists can learn from objective facts. They believe in measurable experience, i.e., behavior, is the best source of known knowledge. They believe that measurable experience is the best source of knowledge. A popular imperialism, imperialism, imperialist would be John Locke, Locke, John Locke, who is also a behaviorist. They value statistical studies and emphasize the role of the environment. The opposing view of an empiricist is an organismic viewpoint is qualitative factors. They do not believe in a mind body distinction. They believe that change is internal, is used to describe just thought. Psychologists such as Kurt Goldstein, who emphasize a holistic model. They believe that knowledge comes from reason. The tendency for adult females in the US to wear high heels is due to sex role socialization. Behavioristic terms to know is reinforcement. All reinforcers, positive or negative, increases the probability that a behavior will occur. So all reinforcers increase the probability that a behavior will occur. Negative reinforcement is when the removal of a stimulus increases the probability that an antidote behavior will occur. So, a negative reinforcement is a removal of a stimuli or stimulus. A positive reinforcement is when the addition of a stimulus strengthens or increases a behavior. Sibling rivalry refers to competition between siblings. It can look like two brothers screaming at each other during a family counseling session. Things to know: primal scene is a psychoanalytic concept that suggests that a young child witnesses his parents having sex or is seduced by a parent. The incident, whether real or imagined, is said to provide impetus for later neurosis. Preconscious psychic processes, also referred to as the foreconscious, is deeper than the conscious, but not as deep as the unconscious. Preconscious material is not conscious, but can be recalled without the use of special psychoanalytic techniques. So the preconscious is in the middle. It's deeper than the conscious, but the information can be easily recalled by the individual, or not easily, but without help. So moving into school counseling, elementary school counseling and guidance services are a fairly new development, which did not begin to gain momentum until the 1960s and increased rapidly. The slow development was cited as: one, majority of people believed that school teachers could double as counselors; two, counseling was conceptualized as focusing on vocation issues; three, secondary schools utilized social workers and psychologists who would intervene if emotional problems were still an issue as the child got older. Secondary school counseling, which became popular in the early 1900s, was fueled by the work of Frank Parsons, who's the father of guidance. So secondary school counseling became popular prior to elementary school counseling. Middle school slash junior high counseling is even more recent phenomenon than elementary school counseling, even though these kids ages 10 to 14 experience more anxiety than elementary and high school counterparts. There are over 260,000 school counselors in the U.S. Some state departments of education made elementary school counselors mandatory in the 1980s. Elementary school counselors are effective, do make a difference in children's lives, and more counselors should be employed. They do perform a host of useful consultation services with teachers and other professionals. Only they are the only organized profession to work with individuals from a purely preventative and developmental standpoint. Remember that Frank Parsons is the father of guidance. He set up centers to help individuals in search of work. Generalized anxiety disorder, GAD, refers to fear, dread, or apprehension without being able to pinpoint the exact reason for the feeling. Anxiety is in contrast to a phobia. In a phobia, the client can pinpoint the cause or source of a fear. In anxiety, they cannot. In a phobia, they can. Nosology is the branch of medicine that concerns itself with the classification of disease. DSM is a manual used to classify and label mental disorders so that all mental health practitioners will mean roughly the same thing when they classify a client. Joseph Wolpe pioneered the technique of systematic desensitization. a behavioristic technique used in both individual and group settings to improve phobic reactions. Albert Ellis developed rational emotive behavior therapy, REBT. REBT teaches clients to think in a more scientific and logical manner. And that's Albert Ellis, REBT. Things to know. Learned helplessness is a pattern in which a person is exposed to a situation that he or she is truly powerless to change and then begins to believe he or she has no control over the environment. The person is subject to depression very easily. Learned helplessness is associated with the work of Martin Seligman, who's the positive psychology pioneer. Martin, inter- Martin induced dogs via electric shock while placed in a harness. So he used the dogs to explore and determine learned helplessness. The risky shift phenomenon is the fact that a group decision is typically more liberal than the average decision of an individual group member prior to participation in the group. The individual's initial stance will generally be more conservative than the group's decision. We have Eric Bernay, or Bernay. He is the father of transactional analysis. He put lingo in everyday language and spoke of the parent ego state, which is roughly equivalent to the superego. So remember that Eric Bernay had the three ego states, which was the child, the adult, and the parent, and they kind of go hand in hand with the id, the ego, the superego. The parent ego is filled with the should, oughts, and must, which often guide our morality. Carl Rogers, he created or is the pioneer of non-directive counseling, which was then changed to client-centered therapy and then changed to person-centered therapy. A little box to know: marital satisfaction often decreases with parenthood and often improves after a child leaves home. Many studies are many studies agree that in general, marital satisfaction is highest at the time of the wedding. So marital satisfaction often decreases with parenthood and is typically at the highest at the time of the wedding. The stat that 50% of all marriages end in divorce appears to be inflated. Abraham Maslow is a humanistic psychologist. He had a holistic viewpoint. He was epigenetic, which means that they view that each they view that stages are systematic. So each phase emerges from the one before it. And we know Piaget, Maslow, and Erikson are the epigenetics, are epigeneticists. He major key for Abraham Maslow is the hierarchy of needs. It postulates lower order physiological and safety needs and higher order needs, such as self actualization. He felt that the person first needs to satisfy immediate or basic needs, such as food and water. Next, safety and security must be dealt with. Next, a need for love, affection, and belonging emerges. The, the highest level or ultimate goal is self actualization, meaning the person becomes all he or she can be. Higher order needs can also be referred to as meta needs, meta needs. For research, he interviewed the best people he could find who escaped the psychology of the average. Cognitive behavioral applies to counselors who emphasize thought processes in terms of their impact on emotions as well as behavioristic strategies. So, cognitive behavioral, they emphasize cognitive, the thought process, in terms of that process and its impact on emotions, considering behavioristic strategies. That's the behavioral portion. An example of a cognitive behavioral is reinforcement or homework assignments. Genetics. They are conditions passed through genes. So genetics are conditions passed through genes. Down syndrome is caused by genetic factors, consists of having a broad facial profile and short stature. Result is a result of a chromosomal abnormality such as trisomy 21. Trisomy 21 is when you have three chromosomes on the chromosome 21. Down syndrome results in an IQ hovering between 50 and 80, with the normal IQ being 100. And the intelligence aspect can be influenced by early intervention, the environment, proper medical care, and dedicated educators. PKU, which is actually phenylketonuria, ketonuria, phenylketonuria. PKU is an amino acid metabolic difficulty that causes intellectual or physical disabilities unless the baby is placed on a special diet. Klinefelter syndrome is when a man has an extra X chromosome, i.e., it'll be XXY. It results in them being tall, having a high pitched voice, an IQ approximately 10 points below the norm, shows no masculinity at puberty, and may be infertile. And that's Klinefelter syndrome. Um, Justin from Mavs has that. Then you have Turner's syndrome, is when a female has no ovaries or sex hormones and is unable to have children. Hemophilia is blood coagulation. Oh, the blood coagulation is such that even a tiny injury could cause severe bleeding. Sickle cell anemia afflicts primarily African Americans, causes anemia, pain, short stature, reduced lifespan, and organ damage. The blood produces a lower amount of healthy red blood cells, um, which is a lack of oxygen rich blood. Fixed action pattern, FAP, will occur whenever a releaser in the environment is present. The pre programmed action or sequence of behavior will not vary. It says, i.e., ritualistic behaviors which are common to all members of a species is fixed action pattern or ritualistic behaviors which are common to all members of a species. Hysteria, previously known as somatization disorder, occurs when an individual displays an organic symptom i.e., blindness, paralysis, or deafness, yet no physiological causes are evident. Pica is a condition in which a person wishes to eat items that are not food. Yeah, Aubrey had that for a little bit. Arnold Gesell, he's a maturation theorist. The maturation theory says that in individual physical, mental, and emotional development is primarily determined by genetic factors. He believed that the growth and development of an individual follow a predetermined course, which is laid out in the individual's genetic makeup. So Arnold Gesell believed in genetic factors. G. Gesell, G. Genetic factors, and genetic makeup. He believed environmental and social may influence development, but that the genetic blueprint determines the basic pattern of growth. He emphasizes that development occurs in a predictable sequence and that each individual will reach milestones at similar ages. And then the last of our human growth um, notes says, which is just a box of things to know, we have the cerebral cortex, which is the most highly developed section of the brain and is responsible for thought, language, and reasoning. So, cerebral cortex is the most highly developed section of the brain and is responsible for thought, language, and reason. Have the hippocampus, which stores memories. The hippocampus is responsible for recollection, which occurs when a person needs to reconstruct a memory. Each time a person reminisces about an experience, that memory is strengthened. So, recollection occurs when a person needs to reconstruct a memory. Recall designates that specific details be retrieved through memory. So, recall designates that specific details be retrieved through memory. Recognition is the ability to recognize previously encountered people, events, or objects. So, recognition, think like, oh yeah, I recognize her, I recognize that. Um, that's recognition. While recall is retrieving the specific details. Like, oh, no, I don't recall when you told me, or I don't recall doing that. It's the specific details. Recollection is like the overall process of reconstructing a memory, like going back into the memory vault. The parietal lobe is a tactile sensory. It processes information such as temperature, taste, touch, and movement. So the parietal lobe is your tactile sensory, which processes information such as temperature, taste, touch, and movement. The occipital lobe is responsible for vision. The frontal lobe is the cognitive functions and voluntary movement. So frontal lobe, cognitive functions, and voluntary movement. The temporal lobe memory is the memory and connects them to our senses. Temporal, temporal lobe memory and connects the memories to our senses. Teens require more sleep than average adults due to their rapid growth. A teen's decreased sleep patterns do not generally stem, stem from defiant behavior. Teens require more sleep than the average adult due to their rapid growth. A teen's decreased sleep pattern do not generally stem from defiant behavior. Teens have biorhythm changes, making them more likely to stay up late and sleep later. They are inundated with academic and social demands, which impair the amount or quality of their sleep. So it basically shows like the human brain where the prefrontal cortex is in the front of the brain. And remember that prefrontal cort the frontal lobe is the cognitive function and voluntary movement, and the cerebral cortex is the most highly developed section of the brain and is responsible for thought, language, and reason. Um, the prefrontal cortex communicates with the amygdala, and the amygdala communicates or sends neurotransmitters to the hypothalamus. And then it looks like that sends information out, and then it comes back in with the thalamus, and then that goes to the prefrontal cortex. And that is the last of our notes on human growth and development.